They marched in with confidence, elite divisions, armored tanks, Luftwaffe air support. The Germans had conquered everything before this. Poland, France, Norway, every opponent had fallen. And now in the summer of 1942, Hitler turned his eyes toward the east again. His target? A city named after his greatest enemy, Stalin. The mission? Simple: crush the city, humiliate the Soviet Union, and control the oil-rich Caucasus beyond. But what unfolded in the city of Stalingrad was not just another battle. It was a nightmare. A blood-soaked, street-by-street massacre that would consume nearly 2 million lives and leave an entire army buried in ice and rubble. This is the story of how 300,000 soldiers vanished. Not all at once, but slowly, painfully, in what became one of the most brutal and pivotal battles in human history. In August 1942, the German Sixth Army, under General Friedrich Paulus, launched its offensive. At first, they made swift gains. The Luftwaffe dropped over 1,000 tons of bombs, turning Stalingrad into a firestorm. Streets were flattened, civilians fled or were buried alive. By the end of the first week, the city was nearly destroyed. But here's what Hitler didn't expect. Stalin refused to retreat. He issued a simple order to the Red Army: not one step back. And that's when Stalingrad turned from a strategic operation into a savage brawl. The Germans weren't just fighting an army, they were fighting an entire city. Every building became a fortress, every basement a sniper's nest. Soviet troops launched counterattacks from sewer systems. They fought from rooftops, alleys, bombed out factories. The Germans called it Rattenkrieg, the War of the Rats. You didn't advance by miles, you advanced by meters. And for every inch taken, blood was paid. The Soviets fought with desperation. Women carried ammunition. Teenagers threw Molotov cocktails. Even civilians picked up rifles from the dead. Reinforcements came across the Volga River, under constant shelling. Many didn't even make it across alive. By October, temperatures had dropped below freezing. German tanks froze. Soldiers lacked winter gear. Ammunition ran low. But still, Hitler refused to pull back. Stalingrad had become symbolic. He told Paulus, "The Sixth Army will stay where it is. It will not retreat." What followed was the beginning of the trap. Because while the Germans were focused on the ruins of Stalingrad, Soviet generals Zhukov and Vasilevsky were preparing a masterstroke, a massive pincer movement to surround the entire German army inside the city. And the Germans never saw it coming. On November 19, 1942, over 1 million Soviet troops launched Operation Uranus, attacking from the north and south, breaking through thin Romanian lines protecting the German flanks. Within 4 days, over 300,000 Axis troops were encircled. The hunter had become the hunted, and now they were trapped. As winter tightened its grip on Stalingrad, the once mighty German Sixth Army found itself surrounded, cut off from supplies, reinforcements, and any hope of escape. Over 300,000 Axis soldiers, including Germans, Romanians, Italians, and Hungarians, were now trapped inside a frozen hell. But Hitler refused to accept reality. He ordered General Paulus to stand firm. Stalingrad must not be surrendered, he said. The army will be supplied by air. It was a fantasy. To keep the Sixth Army alive, the Luftwaffe would have to deliver 500 tons of supplies per day. They managed barely 80. Planes were shot down, runways froze, blizzards grounded fleets. The soldiers received meager rations, if any. Ammunition ran out, fuel vanished, frostbite spread, disease followed, and the dead piled up. Inside the ruins, the men fought on, facing Soviet snipers, artillery barrages, and sub-zero temperatures. Bodies froze in trenches, horses were slaughtered for food. At night, soldiers huddled together for warmth, listening to the distant sound of Soviet loudspeakers blaring messages, "Surrender and live, you are surrounded." But Hitler's voice was louder. He promoted Paulus to Field Marshal, a clear signal. No German Field Marshal had ever surrendered. It was a message: die in Stalingrad, do not come back. Meanwhile, outside the city, the Soviets tightened the noose. They crushed every attempt at a German breakout. A relief effort, Operation Winter Storm, was launched in December by Field Marshal von Manstein. It got within 30 miles of Stalingrad, but failed. The frozen steppe devoured the tanks. Soviet resistance was overwhelming. Inside the pocket, conditions collapsed. There was no medicine, no food, no morale. Some soldiers dug into the rubble like animals. Others went mad from starvation. Letters recovered from the dead spoke of desperation, pleas to mothers, confessions to wives, prayers for forgiveness. One soldier wrote, "We are no longer men, we are ghosts." By January 1943, the Soviets launched their final assault. They crushed the outer rings of resistance and advanced street by street. The Germans, now barely able to stand, surrendered in waves. Thousands died in their final stands. Thousands more simply gave up, collapsing with frostbitten hands in the snow, their weapons long discarded. On January 31, 1943, General Paulus surrendered the southern sector. 2 days later, the northern resistance collapsed. The Battle of Stalingrad was over. Out of 300,000 trapped Axis soldiers, only around 90,000 surrendered. The rest were dead. And of those who surrendered, fewer than 6,000 ever returned home. The rest died in Soviet captivity, of starvation, exhaustion, disease. The city was gone, entire blocks leveled, civilians decimated, but the Soviets had won. And the world had changed. Because Stalingrad wasn't just a battle, it was the turning point of World War II. The fall of Stalingrad didn't just end a battle, it shattered the myth of German invincibility. For years, Nazi propaganda had painted the Wehrmacht as unstoppable. But the frozen ruins of Stalingrad told a different story. Hitler's army could be broken. His generals could fail. His soldiers could be captured. The psychological impact rippled far beyond the Eastern Front. In Berlin, the news of Paulus's surrender was met with disbelief and fury. Hitler called it treason. He'd expected Paulus to die rather than surrender. The propaganda machine went into overdrive, calling the soldiers at Stalingrad martyrs, heroes who fell for the fatherland. But behind the speeches and headlines, the truth was clear. Germany had suffered its first undeniable defeat. And it wasn't just any loss, it was catastrophic. Over 800,000 Axis troops were killed, wounded, or captured. An entire army group was obliterated. Billions in military equipment lost. Morale among the German population plummeted. And for the first time, cracks began to appear in Hitler's high command. For the Soviet Union, the victory was both military and symbolic. They had stopped the Nazi war machine at the gates of a city named after their leader. They had done what no other nation had done, turned back the tide of the Third Reich. The Red Army had shown the world it could not only resist but strike back. But the cost? Unimaginable. Soviet casualties were staggering. Over 1 million dead or wounded. Entire divisions were wiped out. Civilian losses were even worse. Families died in bombings, starvation, and street combat. By the end of the battle, the city was a wasteland of corpses, rubble, and broken lives. And yet, they endured. Historians often debate the turning point of World War II. Some say it was D-Day, others say El Alamein. But to many, Stalingrad was the moment the war turned. Because from that point forward, Germany was on the defensive. The Red Army began its long push westward, reclaiming lost territory, city by city, village by village, all the way to Berlin. But the shadow of Stalingrad never faded. Veterans spoke of it like a nightmare, a place where time stopped and only death advanced. Survivors on both sides carried the trauma for the rest of their lives. Soviet soldiers remembered frostbitten fingers, the smell of burning flesh, and the sound of screams buried in snow. German survivors, those few who returned, were haunted by guilt, horror, and the silence of the 270,000 comrades who never came home. Even decades later, the ruins of Stalingrad, now Volgograd, stood as a memorial to one of history's darkest and bloodiest chapters. Because what happened there wasn't just a military disaster, it was a human one. Today, the Battle of Stalingrad stands as a warning. Not just to generals and politicians, but to all of us. It's a reminder of what happens when pride overtakes logic, when leaders send men to die for symbols, when cities become battlegrounds, and human lives are reduced to numbers on a map. What happened in Stalingrad wasn't fate, it was a decision, a series of choices made by powerful men, on both sides. Choices that led to a city buried in snow and blood. That number sink in, it was the largest and deadliest urban battle in history. And yet for many outside of Russia or Germany, Stalingrad is just a name in a textbook, a chapter barely covered, a place most people couldn't find on a map. But for those who were there, it was the end of the world. Soldiers who entered the city in 1942, many were never seen again. No graves, no names etched in stone, just ice, dust, and silence. They vanished in bombed-out factories, frozen trenches, and shattered apartment blocks. Their stories lost, unless we choose to remember. Because history forgotten is history repeated. And in today's world, where conflict still rages and cities still burn, the lessons of Stalingrad are more relevant than ever. The courage of those who resisted, the horror of those who suffered, the stubbornness of those who refused to retreat, even when retreat meant survival. Stalingrad wasn't just a turning point in World War II, it was a turning point in humanity's understanding of what war really costs, not just lives, but souls. And that's why we tell this story, not to glorify the past, but to learn from it, to honor those who fought, to remember those who fell, and to remind ourselves, the line between victory and catastrophe is thinner than we think. It's not the weapons that decide it, it's the will, it's the strategy, and sometimes it's just the weather. The Battle of Stalingrad was won not with brilliance but with brutality, not with speed but with stubbornness. And in the end, it reshaped the fate of the entire world. So the next time you hear the name Stalingrad, know that behind it are 300,000 ghosts who never made it home, and millions more whose lives were changed forever. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, shocked you, or taught you something new, hit that like button and subscribe for more war stories, forgotten history, and untold truths. Share this video with someone who needs to understand what real sacrifice looks like, because history isn't just in books,